The function. Did I read some of these? I think I might have. Let's see what's new. Let's see what else is new. More bioethics. Bioethics Foundation Physics. Haythrop. I don't know what Haythrop is. Let's take a look. I had some other stuff saved. What is this? Let's find out what this stuff is. The Mark of a Good Informant. Oh yeah, I just thought that was a good title. Let's see if this is available. No, why are you not available? Acta Analytica. Buy article. $40. William James and Allama Iqbal on empirical faith. Cosmological argument from moderate realism. It looks like you've got a lot of different things in this journal. Habermas, Vadimo, and Feedback. Learning Gap or Learning Journal. Decorum Dolmus Domini. The theological understanding and adoration of the most holy Eucharist as a contemplation of the beautiful. Okay. Yeah, alright. Well, let me poke around for a sec. What else did I have here? Oh, Epistemic. I haven't read anything from Epistemic. Although I did just read that whole thing, which is basically epistemology right now. Alright, let's just see what we got. Yeah, the myth. Oh, okay. Did this not load correctly? Let's see. Or is this exactly what it was? No, yeah. The problem of unwelcome epistemic company. Many of us are unmoved when it is objected that some morally or intellectually suspect source agrees with our belief. Well, broken clock's right twice a day. Let's see what that is. It might be fun. 1 to 13. Ooh, it's available. Let's see. 23. Double spaced. Why not? Be a very epistemic focused day. I haven't read anything from Episteme in a while, so, or maybe ever for all I know. Let's see, is this it? Yes. I'm doing a European friendly stream today. Hope people in Europe are happy at least. Don't know if they're busy on a Saturday though. Thanks for the follows for the people out there. I appreciate it. I should get one of those fancy overlays so like pops up but I don't see it. Oh, we got a few follows. That's cool. Yeah, so we got Back and Hidea and MN7 and Momad 2020. Appreciate that. Okay, the problem. Like no, we got some nice quotes here. Alright, so got 23 pages. I can do it. I can do it. I don't know. Okay, so let's get this off. Oh wait, I should do that. I hate that thing. I'm sorry. I keep forgetting to like disable that. But the warning sound is yeah, so there's a link in the chat. If you want it, you can always type exclamation point paper and it will pop back up. Okay. So it's 184.85. So, you know, I can just leave it at 184. Do a double on the day. Okie dokie. What was I doing? Yes. So, there. Yeah. Let's read the quotes. It doesn't bother me if I happen to agree with the mainstream media in criticizing the Soviet Union. Trotsky was charged in the 1930s with agreeing with the fascists in his condemnation of the Soviet Union, and he pointed out that his critique was true. He wasn't going to abandon it if someone else had happened to say it for different reasons. Noam Chomsky, in response to being challenged for agreeing with the mainstream media in condemnation of the Soviet Union. It's okay to know it's Mussolini. Look, Mussolini was Mussolini. It's okay too. It's a very good quote. It's a very good, interesting quote, and I know it. I saw it. I saw and I know who said it. But what difference does it make whether it's Mussolini or somebody else? It's certainly a very interesting quote. Donald Trump, in response to being challenged for tweeting a quote sometimes attributed to Mussolini. It's better to live one day as a lion than 100 years as a sheep. On one occasion, he was being praised by some wicked men, and said, "I am sadly afraid that I must have done some wicked thing." Diogenes Laertius on the philosopher Antisthenes. So I guess, the question here is as I actually read the abstract, is what happens when bad people praise you? Is that an epistemic problem? I'd be more worried that basically I'm being used for bad purposes, but that doesn't. I don't know how that would really affect my knowledge. Okay, the problem. Like Noam Chomsky and Donald Trump, we're typically unmoved except by irritation when someone lambasts us for agreeing with the source that is morally or intellectually suspect by our own lights. But accusations of guilt by epistemic association are asymmetrically popular. We tend to issue them in context of disagreement, yet think they bear little relevance for truth on our own views. This is a mistake. We sometimes face what I call the problem of unwelcome epistemic company. This is the problem of encountering agreement about the content of your belief from an unwelcome source. The problem of unwelcome epistemic company is scarcely explored by philosophers, yet it is a problem of everyday life. I think I agree with this. It is a bit of a problem. If you happen to have a bunch of views and a bunch of crappy people have those views too, then you might actually have a problem that your views are crappy views. So it's the old joke of The Simpsons did it, of course. It said Fox News, not racist, but number one among racists. So it's maybe you've got a problem there. In what follows, I elaborate 4 iterations of the problem that unwelcome epistemic company poses. To this end, I introduce and discuss some simple cases. I then offer preliminary lessons of the problem, and I canvass possible responses, ranging from the extreme confidence of Chomsky and Trump to an epistemic prudishness that always seeks to reduce agreement with unwelcome sources. 2 iterations. In circumscribing the problem of unwelcome epistemic company, we must appreciate that not all unwelcome epistemic company poses a problem, even prima facie one. Consider the following case. Blue sky. You believe the sky is blue, then you find out that Osama bin Laden also believed that the sky is blue. Wow. This case does not even threaten to pose a problem, either epistemic or moral. Although bin Laden may be an unwelcome epistemic company of some sort, his company poses none of the problems that I described below. In particular, bin Laden's agreement about the color of the sky raises no epistemic or moral issues about your own belief that the sky is blue, or that the role of your moral character is in coming to that belief. Here is a case, on the other hand, where you might face any of at least 4 different problems due to unwelcome epistemic company. Refugees. You haven't read much on refugee crime rates in the United States, but you pay some attention to the news. Despite being generally in favor of increased acceptance of refugees, you find yourself with the belief that refugees on average commit more crimes than citizens. You then encounter a white nationalist who also believes that refugees commit more crimes than citizens. 2 of the problems that may be raised by refugees are distinctly epistemic, and 2 are moral. The epistemic problems have to do with your beliefs, truth, or normative status, and the moral problems have to do with its ideology or implications. I will address these in order. 2.1 Epistemic problems. In refugees, agreement may provide some defeasible evidence that your belief is false. In other words, the problem of unwelcome epistemic company might take the following general form: falsity. The fact that S believes that P is evidence that not P. This is a problem having to do with the truth of your belief. But how bad is the problem? The amount of evidence that unwelcome epistemic company provides in cases like refugees partly depends on how unreliable one has reason to believe S really is. In refugees, this is left unstated. If the white nationalist just gets the relevant matters wrong, frequently relative to the average person, but still very rarely, then perhaps you need not worry too much, and what degrees of error bother you will depend partly on your tolerance for epistemic risk. Yeah, Okay. But suppose that your epistemic company does provide a great deal of evidence that your belief is false, say because they get relevant matters wrong well over half of the time. After all, even agreement from a source that gets relevant matters right 51% of the time is some evidence that the belief in question is true. In that case, agreement provides evidence that your belief is false, or very risky, or very chancy at least. We are only very rarely able to assess the actual or even approximate degree of unreliability of any particular person, or even ourselves, whether in general or in specific domains. In light of this, the possibility of frequent error need only be salient in order that falsity might apply to a case of an unwelcome agreement. Even if you cannot assign an exact or even vague probability to someone's error, as long as there is a salient possibility that they are morally more unreliable than not within the relevant domain, their unwelcome agreement in that domain can warrant concern. Alright, so if you got some questionable people and you start agreeing with them all the time, but then you also know that there are very epistemically shaky people, then you have to start worrying about that because they're just unreliable. They're like more unreliable than not. It's like, well, why are you agreeing with the people who are getting stuff wrong? All that being said, even if your unwelcome company is extremely unreliable, the normative force of the evidence provided by falsity will partly depend on your independent evidence for the proposition subject to unwelcome agreement. If you already know that you came to believe via a route that secures more warrant for you than warrant that your company secures for the negation of your belief, you may not face much of a problem at all. For example, suppose you calculate that 35 plus 15 equals 50, and a mathematically incompetent person calculates the same. Even if this person gets simple arithmetic questions wrong 95% of the time, the evidence provided by their agreement is decisively defeated by your prior independent evidence for the proposition. Your total evidence makes it likely that this is just one of those unlikely cases where an extremely unreliable person got a calculation right. Although unwelcome agreement that 35 plus 15 equals 50 is perhaps some evidence that 35 plus 15 is not equal 50, such evidence is decisively defeated by your overwhelming evidence to the contrary. This is not a situation in which you do not face the problem of falsity at all. Rather, it's a situation where the problem of falsity is just not very severe. Yeah, I mean, this is the problem of the broken clock. Broken clocks right twice a day. It's like, yeah, and so if it happens to be right, that has nothing to do with you getting the time right. It just happens that that was their lucky moment. Yeah, so that was the 5% that they didn't get it right. The qualification about your independent evidence is why it is important to the formulation of refugees that you haven't read much on refugee crime rates in the United States. If you have read a great deal on refugee crime rates, then it is likely that you have independent evidence to defeat the evidence of unwelcome agreement. The need for this qualification in order for the problem to seem more serious suggests that the problem of unwelcome epistemic company, at least in its form of falsity, is faced more commonly by laypersons than by experts. By experts, I mean to include both credentialed experts and autodidacts. This is because laypersons are much less likely than experts to have independent lines of evidence that defeat the sort of evidence that unwelcome agreement provides. So if the white nationalist beliefs about crime committed by refugees are likely false, then there's at least a salient possibility that they are likely false. Then you face the problem of falsity. But there are three other distinct problems you might face. The following, like falsity, is an epistemic problem. Malfunction. The fact that S believes that P provides evidence that you acquired your belief P via an epistemically faulty process. Perhaps the white nationalists are likely to hold their beliefs about refugees on the basis of or otherwise due to some faulty epistemic process, even when their beliefs are true. So if then the fact that the white nationalist shares your beliefs about refugees provides some evidence that your belief forming process is in some way bad, even if your belief is true. So you're right, but for the wrong reasons. So or you're wrong for the right reasons, or you're right for the wrong reasons. You might be right, but it's for the wrong reasons. So you're right because the belief is true. In this form, unwelcome epistemic company may give you evidence about the reasoning or other processes behind your belief, whereas falsity provides you with an alethic defeater, that's truth or falsity defeater. Malfunction provides you with a rationality defeater, like you're being irrational. You're not being untruthful, you're being irrational. Okay. It is worth emphasizing that malfunction is broader than just a claim about your reasoning processes. Perhaps you arrived at the belief in question intuitively via perception or otherwise on the basis of an immediate direct judgment. For these kinds of beliefs, Unwelcome Epistemic Company may pose the problem of calling into question the truth-conduciveness of the relevant cognitive faculties or processes. Alongside reasoning, intuitive reactions are one of the many processes for acquiring beliefs, so both sorts of processes are covered by malfunction. Alright, so like you like some food and you like some idiot also likes some food, but you think, well, maybe the good taste of this is because my sort of taste buds are messed up. I guess that's a possibility. And while you're thinking, well, that idiot likes the food, and so why do I like the food? Maybe we both are malfunctioning, even though the food tastes tasty, and it is tasty. Okay, but your taste buds are messed up. In the case of refugees, the application of malfunction seems especially plausible. It may be that white nationalists tend to make inferences about refugees as a class on the basis of sensationalist anecdotes that are prominent in the news. This is not a good form of reasoning, but it may be that you, too, despite your generally favorable attitude towards refugees, are engaging in it. This sort of epistemic similarity is just the kind of problem that unwelcome agreement can help us to discover. Okay, so you're being fed bad information or fed a bad narrative, and that's why your reasoning got you to some sort of conclusion. As with falsity, the evidence provided by malfunction is defeasible. In addition to overwhelming independent evidence for the truth of your belief, you might also have overwhelming independent evidence for the differences in the rational basis between your belief and the white nationalists. The importance of this qualification is further evidence that the problem of unwelcome epistemic company is worse for laypersons than for experts, because the experts are more likely than laypersons, though certainly not guaranteed, to already have a thorough accounting of both their and their opponent's rational basis for their beliefs. I would say no. I know lots of philosophers, and they make up a lot of crap. So I don't know if experts are really philosophers, at least. Maybe other people, other places, but the philosophers only think they are good at this. But there's one of those biases that I think they always say everyone falls to. Everyone thinks that they're rational. No one ever thinks that they're making these sort of like silly mistakes and like implicit bias a lot of times. So I'm not entirely certain that is worse for laypersons than for experts. I'd say this is pretty universal, but that doesn't matter for the course of this paper. But it's a fun paper, at least so far. It's more, I think, it's definitely dealing with a more everyday problem than people worried about the extent of induction from earlier. Anyway, moral problems. Beyond the epistemic defeaters identified by falsity and malfunction, refugees potentially raises two moral problems. The first is a problem for your own moral behavior or character. It's getting hot in here. Vice. The fact that S believes that P provides evidence that your belief that P is connected in some way to a moral vice. Okay, so you're thinking this because you're morally bankrupt somehow. Whether or not it's false or based on faulty cognitive processes, your belief about refugees might be the sort of view that attracts people with a certain kind of moral vice. For example, the vice of racism as manifested by white nationalism. When you discover your agreement with the white nationalists, a distinctly moral possibility is made salient to you. Perhaps you have a vicious character trait that attracts people to the belief in question, or are at least carrying on in a matter characteristic of this trait, and this is part of how you came to hold your belief. In this way, your unwelcome epistemic company acts as a mirror of the sort of person you might be or might be becoming, a sort of person that you do not want to be. So, as opposed to a faulty rationality, there's a faulty character trait, and that's why it might be showing you that you're sort of ignoring the rational way of thinking because you have a faulty moral character, and that is sort of blinding you to the irrationality of your beliefs. Okay. Figuring out, yeah, but then you wouldn't actually think of these people as bad people. They'd be very good people. And so at that point, you wouldn't be able to see the problem in the other folks, in the white nationalists either. Figuring out to what degree you're unwelcome company, and they wouldn't be unwelcome, yeah. They're very fine people. Your unwelcome company raises the likelihood of vice is tricky. After all, it could be that the racist tendencies make it very likely that you will believe that refugees commit more crimes, but that believing that refugees commit more crimes does not make it at all likely that you have racist tendencies. Presumably something structurally similar to this possibility drives Chomsky's thought in the quotation that opens this paper, wherein Chomsky appeals to the fact that the mainstream media has different reasons from his. But notice that someone motivated to figure out which of these probabilistic relationships obtains has in a sense already conceded that they face vice as a problem. After all, figuring out where one stands here is precisely a way of responding to the problem of unwelcome epistemic company in the form of vice. It is not a way of showing that there was no problem in the first place. Another way to put the point is that one is not called on, absent some special reason, to check whether one's view makes it likely that one is vicious in a particular way. Rather, this is something that one might be inclined to do precisely in the face of a particular kind of unwelcome epistemic company. This paper argues that this kind of double-checking can be rational. Yeah, sure, it's like, if someone you really dislike holds the exact same opinion with you, and it's not something like the sky is blue, but something kind of much more particular, you say, well, why did they think this and me? Because if we're thinking the same way, maybe we're not so different after all. And so it's this sort of similarity that we're not so different after all, because why would we both have this one unusual viewpoint? And then how did we arrive there? So that's a reasonable question, because it would be, I guess the thought is it would be extremely unusual that me and some person I think is very different from me would actually hold the exact same very unusual viewpoint. It'd be incredibly unlikely. And so you'd want to know why there was some sort of significantly unusual overlap between you and something very different from you. Okay. Like the epistemic problems, the evidence that vice provides is defeasible. Even in the formulation of refugees, the fact that you are generally in favor of increased acceptance of refugees is some evidence against your being bigoted towards them, though it is hardly decisive. Here, being an expert rather than a layperson is not as strong as a protection against the evidence that unwelcome agreement provides. Expertise in refugee issues does not necessarily include expertise in or even reflection on one's own moral attitudes toward refugees, and expertise in general is not the same thing as morally critical self-reflection. Vice is not the only moral problem raised by refugees. The case also raises the following moral problem, not about your own moral character, but about the implications of the content of your belief. Implication. The fact that S believes that P provides evidence that you miss something important about the stakes of P that is relevant to the endorsement of P. Stakes. Interesting. Perhaps you do not either implicitly or explicitly share the vicious character trait that motivates your unwelcome company to agree with you. Nevertheless, it may be that they agree with you because they see something about the matter of agreement that you do not, and is precisely something that appeals only to people who are vicious in a particular way, or in something that makes this particular matter more important than you at first realized. In the case of crimes committed by refugees, perhaps what really attracts white nationalists, though it does not function as a reason for their belief, is that high crime rates among refugees in turn help to justify restricting acceptance of refugees, and this is, let us suppose, something that you have never considered. Yeah, this ulterior motives is going on right here. So, like, you find out that they're doing it, but it's for ulterior motives. Okay. Whether or not this new information will ultimately change your mind, it might still be true, but the reason someone is pushing it, you only found out, is because they have ulterior motives. It's useful to them to push this sort of belief. But that doesn't make the belief wrong, but they're pushing it for some reason. So it's not exactly the same target, but yeah, it does matter. Whether or not this new information will ultimately change your mind, it is reasonable to react to the unwelcome epistemic company of the white nationalists partly by worrying that such information might exist and double-checking accordingly. Given that you are someone who thinks that the acceptance of refugees is morally important, the evidence provided by implication raises the stakes of the matter. If you end up maintaining your belief, you will be in spite of, not regardless of, this new evidence. What the white nationalists may give you is some good evidence that there is something that makes careful inquiry into the question especially important. Yeah. Well, it's like you may agree with some racist people about some stuff, but the reason that they're pushing it is for ulterior motives. So you have to be careful when you state things that it's not being used in a bad way. This happens a lot, where people say something and then well, they'd be like, well, that's what the racists say. You must be racist. Like, no, they're saying it for racist reasons. I'm saying it for, like, other reasons. So, but yeah, they have to be, this matters on the internet a lot, where things are taken out of context. I think that's kind of what's going on here, that the racist context is different from other contexts. Yeah. Actually, everyone gets caught up in that. You have to be very careful how you phrase things on the internet, because this all gets recorded. And then people are like, you said bad things. I'm like, no, I didn't. You weren't paying attention. Refugees is a case where you very well may face any of at least 4 different versions of the problem of unwelcome epistemic company, 2 of which are epistemic and 2 of which are moral. But it is important to recognize that these versions of the problem are related to each other in complicated ways. For example, consider the following case in which one might argue that only the moral problems arise. Selectivity. You and Fred are in the same academic department in the 1930s Germany. Fred is known to be anti-Semitic and is meticulous when it comes to finding faults in his Jewish colleagues' work. When it comes to everyone else, however, Fred just doesn't pay that much attention. Despite not thinking of yourself as an anti-Semite, you might find that your own views of your Jewish colleagues matches Fred's, and that you also don't pay that much attention otherwise. Selectivity is a case where your belief is at least threatened by vice and implication, but it is not obvious whether it is threatened by falsity or malfunction. While I do not think that it is in fact common that someone is rationally and accurately attuned to all and only the faults of one's Jewish colleagues, less theoretically ideal cases that resemble this one do exist in the real world, and so it is a possibly useful possibility to explore. Okay, they're continuing, because I mean, you could definitely see this in the workplace, like women are much more severely criticized than men in certain cases. And it's like, well, why are you picking on the women? You should pick on everybody. And so now, of course, the criticism might be warranted. The woman might have made a mistake, but like if they're being constantly picked on, then it's like, even if you agree with the mistake, it's like, well, it's the blame at that point is not being fairly distributed. First, what is wrong with Fred, such that his agreement poses a problem? Fred's particular beliefs about his Jewish colleagues do not in themselves, ex hypothesis, immediately reveal any distinctly epistemic problems, but in the wider context or pattern, they reveal serious moral problems, the ulterior motives, the anti-Semitism, and these problems underwrite the application of vice and implication to the case. Vice applies to encountering Fred's epistemic company because Fred's record of accuracy and rationality about his Jewish colleagues is plausibly due to a moral vice, anti-Semitism. It takes a particular sort of selective attention to identify all and only faults of one's Jewish colleagues, and it is morally objectionable to focus on one's epistemic energies on all and only crimes committed by members of that group, even if one does so in an epistemically excellent manner. So when you find yourself agreeing with Fred, you require evidence both that your belief is epistemically appropriate as far as truth and evaluation of evidence is concerned, and that this is due to something morally vicious. Yep. This is, what was it? It happened to me. I called someone out once, and all of a sudden, people start criticizing me. Sometimes correctly, but all of a sudden it was a lot. It's like, well, okay, now why is everyone focusing on my faults? Everyone's got problems. It's like, yeah, well, you pissed off someone in power, and now you're getting focused on. You're getting selected out. Such is life. Implication may also apply to selectivity because it is highly plausible that expending selective energy on identifying and pursuing faults only among Jewish colleagues in Nazi Germany serves to prolong and intensify systemic oppression of Jewish people. Perhaps this is something that either implicitly or explicitly appeals to Fred. As with vice, this is wholly consistent with you being within your purely epistemic rights in believing what you believe. The upshot is that because there are moral constraints on epistemic practices, in this case how we direct our critical attention, and violating these constraints is compatible with obeying purely epistemic constraints, it seems possible to face the moral but not epistemic problems of an unwelcome epistemic company. However, things are not so simple. In particular, there are reasons for thinking that vice and implication are reducible to malfunction. Yeah, I guess so. I will consider these in order. Vice may be reduced to malfunction because the presence of moral vice, for example anti-Semitism, in the etiology of belief seems to provide some defeasible grounds for debunking that belief via a rationality defeater. This may be the case, but it need not be. Notice that the case of selectivity itself actually avoids such a debunking, and therefore avoids a reduction from vice to malfunction. How does it do this? The moral vice of anti-Semitism does not play a rationalizing role in the actual content of the matter of unwelcome agreement. Rather, the moral vice is merely the putative cause of Fred's otherwise excellent epistemic skills being directed as they are. Compare a purely moral case of someone in a dominant racial group who helps all and only people who share their racial identity on the basis of antipathy towards those who do not. There is one sense in which a person's actions, helping so-and-so, are morally right, but another sense helping only so-and-so for bad reasons, in which they are wrong. In such a case, the narrowly right actions in the relevant context provide evidence for a moral vice. Likewise, in cases that resemble selectivity, there is nothing wrong with the beliefs per se, epistemically speaking, but in the wider social as well as motivational context, these beliefs provide evidence of a moral vice. In finding that we agree with such a person, we may worry that we share this vice. Notice further that even in cases where we extract the problem of malfunction from the problem of vice, say because a moral vice does not play a rationalizing role for the belief, this is not a full reduction. If it turns out that your belief that P is the result of a faulty reasoning in precisely the sense that it is based on epistemically irrelevant racist attitudes, you still face two distinct problems. True, in this kind of case, the moral problem, having racist attitudes, itself poses an epistemic problem, having irrational beliefs. But that does not mean that having racist attitudes fully reduces to having irrational beliefs. Another way to put the point, having immoral attitudes is a problem, and using them irrationally is another. Yeah. I mean, it's like it's the selection problem of only picking out the certain minority group for all your epistemic work. That's an irrational thing to do. Why should you select out just some minorities for all your epistemic efforts? That makes no sense. What about implication? It might seem that implication reduces to malfunction because it's to the extent that you miss the implications of the content of your belief, your reasoning is impoverished. However, as with vice, this merely shows that implication can pose an epistemic problem in addition to a moral problem, as when a bad implication of a belief is also a rational ground for rejecting it. A controversial instance of this phenomenon involves what is sometimes called pragmatic encroachment. Some philosophers have recently argued that epistemic standards for holding a particular belief might be raised in cases where the purely practical states of the belief are likewise raised. If this view is right, then cases where the evidence of implication is evidence of high stakes, it might give you reason to think your belief is insufficiently justified. This is one way in which a moral problem of unwelcome epistemic company can in turn pose an epistemic problem. So you have some sort of dangerous thought, and if someone else has some dangerous thought, then you might be worried about it. Yeah, but this need not be the situation. After investigating a matter of unwelcome agreement, you may find both that there was nothing wrong with your prior reasoning, and that you were non-culpably ignorant of some unseemly implication of the content of your beliefs that attracts people with a particular moral vice, but does not raise the stakes for that belief. Perhaps less surprisingly, you might face the epistemic but not moral problems of unwelcome epistemic company. Consider the following case. Calculator. If anyone has any questions out there, feel free to ask. I'm just reading this first time too, so I'm just seeing what happens here. Perhaps less surprisingly, you might face the epistemic but not the moral problems of unwelcome epistemic company. Consider the following case. Calculator. You are calculating a complicated tip at a restaurant. You are aware that your companion has a peculiar calculator programmed to frequently but not always make errors in basic arithmetic that are very common among human beings. The calculator agrees with you. Alright, so you've got a drunk friend who agrees with you that you calculate the tip correctly. Calculator is a case where your belief is threatened by falsity and malfunction, but neither vice nor implication. Epistemically speaking, the issues you face are similar to those in refugees, and the severity likewise depends on the frequency of error and your tolerance of epistemic risk. But unless a calculator is really peculiar, there are no grounds for worrying about your moral character or morally relevant implications of your calculation. Yeah, again, it depends on what the risk is. 3. Responses. How should one respond to the various problems of unwelcome epistemic company? I have already described both the cases and interpretations of the cases in ways that reveal the flavor of my own answer to this question, but I now want to step back. I have imagined and commended various forms of doubting, revising, and rechecking one's beliefs or characters when one encounters either a case best interpreted by falsity, malfunction, vice, or implication. Am I right to commend these responses? The general problem of unwelcome epistemic company is a problem having to do with what epistemologists sometimes call higher order evidence. Unfortunately, for my purposes, the term is given a variety of disparate definitions across the literature. The term higher order evidence may refer to any combination of evidence about evidence about evidentiary relations, evidence about cognitive processes, or just indirect evidence about a proposition or belief. Unwelcome epistemic company may provide higher order evidence in any of these senses. For example, cases of unwelcome epistemic company that pose the problem of falsity seem to provide a kind of indirect evidence about the specific content of agreement, whereas cases that pose malfunction seem to provide evidence about evidence, the evidence of the evaluation of evidence, cognitive function, and much else. Because the problem of unwelcome epistemic company have to do with a certain kind of higher order evidence, appropriate responses will likely resemble responses to other problems having to do with higher order evidence, especially the problems of peer disagreement. For example, faced with a case of unwelcome epistemic company, you will oppose any sort of revision of belief or double checking if you endorse extreme steadfastness. In response to unwelcome epistemic company and believing that P, you should maintain your credence that P and resist any introspective moral concern on the basis of the unwelcome agreement. According to extreme steadfastness, unwelcome epistemic company poses no real problem at all. Of course, even those who reject extreme steadfastness as a general response to higher order evidence may, like Chomsky or Trump, embrace it when confronted with unwelcome epistemic company. And there is a wide array of cases of unwelcome epistemic company that are, like Blue Sky, typically and correctly treated as irrelevant. Vegetarians are generally not bothered by their agreement with Hitler. Critics of American interventionism in the Middle East are generally not bothered by their agreement with members of ISIS. Mennonite theists are generally not bothered by their agreement about the existence of God with the Westboro Baptist Church, and so on. Cases like these anecdotally support the popular thought that guilt by epistemic association is no more a good foundation of criticism than its more general counterpart. But clearly not all cases are alike. Refugees bears on one's belief in a way that agreement with Hitler about vegetarianism does not. What really does the work in these cases where we justifiably reject guilt by epistemic association is not the mere logical compatibility to which Chomsky and Trump appeal, but rather that we judge that the unwelcome features of one's epistemic company simply do not bear in a relevant way or to the relevant degree on the belief's truth, normative status, ideology, or implications, as in Blue Sky above. Sometimes there can be a dispute about whether the problem of unwelcome epistemic company arises. For example, in the case of critics of American interventionism and members of ISIS, those who make accusations of guilt by epistemic association may believe that some single objectionable underlying characteristics motivates both parties. But rather than simply state the banality that a member of ISIS believes that P is compatible with P, one should instead interrogate which kinds of unwelcome epistemic company ISIS is supposed to represent, and whether it really poses a problem in this case. After all, no one would think to suggest that Blue Sky is a problem, so something other than logical compatibility must be behind the complaint. At the other end of the spectrum, that is anchored on one side by extreme steadfastness, one finds extreme dissociationism. Typo. Extreme dissociationism, because it's a D. In response to unwelcome epistemic company and believing that P, you should always reduce your credence in P by n degree or engage in introspective moral concern. According to extreme dissociationism, one should take unwelcome epistemic company as a decisive reason to question one's belief or moral character, and to do so in a highly specific way. Extreme dissociationism is perhaps not common in self-application, but popular arguments that appeal to guilt by epistemic association seem to presuppose something like it. Many people point out to critics of Israel that there are anti-Semites who also criticize Israel. Indeed, something like the structure of selectivity in mind. In 2016, many pointed out to supporters of Bernie Sanders that some opponents of Hillary Clinton were sexist, and so on. It seems that extreme dissociationism, although perhaps not something we commonly apply to ourselves, is a popular tool in the hands of those assigning guilt by epistemic association. Oh, absolutely. This happens a bunch. Be like, oh, this bad person thinks it and you think it. Why do you think that? And it's what's it called? It's It's one of those whataboutisms, or not whataboutism. It's sort of I forget what they have like sort of a fallacy politically term for it, where you're basically trying to get people to justify themselves or waste time explaining themselves as opposed to doing what they want to be doing. So you're kind of trolling them to wrong foot the person. Like its steadfast counterpart, extreme dissociationism is far too strong. Unwelcome epistemic company and higher order evidence generally really does sometimes pose a problem, but sometimes it does not, even a little bit, as Blue Sky shows clearly. The crucial step again is to determine whether the features that make the epistemic company unwelcome bear on a belief's truth, normative status, ideology, or implications. If we were to avoid unwelcome epistemic company at all costs, then we would systematically guarantee getting matters wrong that a company gets right. I commend the far more moderate and flexible principle of moderate dissociationism. Unwelcome agreement that P always provides some defeasible reason to doubt, revise, or recheck your belief that P. This reason comes in degrees of strength depending on the case. All right. Some defeasible reason. When some heinous person believes something, you have a reason to consider checking why you also believe it. According to moderate dissociationism, extreme steadfastness is flat out incorrect, and extreme dissociation has only a kernel of truth in the most extreme cases. Unwelcome epistemic company is neither always nor never a problem, but it very often makes salient the possibility of a problem. This possibility should not be dismissed without ruling out that one is not guilty by epistemic association one or more of the four ways. Some cases might be easy, for example Blue Sky, but some cases might be hard, for example refugees. Moderate dissociationism is general enough to accommodate the facts that unwelcome epistemic company does not have to do with the truths of one's beliefs. It need not only require abandonment of belief, it may raise problems that are both moral and epistemic in nature, and it comes in varying degrees of strength. I mean, this is reasonable, but it's like, what's it called? I mean, there's always reason to, there's usually, for most of your beliefs, there's going to be something that gets you to, reconsider them, and the argument here is that, well, having some heinous person believe it also might be one of those reasons to get you to reconsider why you believe something, which is very fair. For disagreement, the problem of unwelcome epistemic company bears an unmistakable resemblance to the problem of peer disagreement. Yep. It's like, why does you would disagree with your peers, and why you epistemically disagree on things also? Yeah, this is a good question. Epistemic peer disagreement. I once got to a discussion with this is many years ago, where they were saying, well, the fact that people disagree with you you should reconsider what you believe. I was like, just because people philosophers disagree with me is no reason for me to give up my beliefs. I was just like, no, we are not on an equal epistemic footing. I just don't think that they were arguing that other people have equal epistemic footing. I was like, no, I just flat out reject that there's equal epistemic footing on some topics. I consider myself an expert on these things, and just because people disagree with me provides zero reason for me to reconsider it. And so who counts as an epistemic peer? Okay, very roughly, the problem of peer disagreement is the problem posed by encountering disagreement about P from someone who you reasonably judge as epistemically well positioned as you with respect to P. Yeah, of course, how do you judge this is the question. In both the cases of peer disagreement and unwelcome agreement, your belief, do I know this person, Joshua Blanchard? No, I wasn't arguing with, I don't think I was arguing with Joshua Blanchard many, many years ago. In both cases, peer unwelcome agreement, your belief that P can be challenged by the mere fact of another person or persons or groups' attitudes toward P in light of your evaluation of them as agents. In the case of disagreement, the fact that someone believes not P, together with the fact that the same person is an epistemic peer, puts pressure on your belief that P. In the problem of unwelcome epistemic company, the fact that someone believes that P, together with the fact that the same person is either epistemically or morally compromised, puts pressure on your belief that P. As noted above, the possible responses to the problem are at least partly parallel, because both problems involve issues having to do with higher order evidence. Yeah, it's who counts? Just because this is the sort of flip side of the heinous people believe something, so I should be worried about. Now, in this case, this is that the people I think are good disagree with me, as opposed to agreeing with me. Having bad people agree with me, now I have good people disagree with me. So it's just the other side of this. So you have to, it's how you are judging people makes a difference here. Yeah. It's just the contrapositive or something of this. Flip side. Another connection between unwelcome epistemic company and peer disagreement, worthy of investigation within its own right, is the role of moral considerations in each problem. It is tempting to think that the special relevance of moral characteristics is unique to the problem of unwelcome epistemic company, because there is arguably no analog to either vice or implication in the case of disagreement. It may initially seem plausible that mere disagreement with an epistemic peer about P does not give one reason to suspect that there is some moral flaw in oneself, or that there are moral aspects of a view that one has missed in any systematic way. I don't know. I mean, if you think someone's really smart and they hold that opinion, maybe it's a good idea to go pursue why they think that. So it's not that you're a moral failing, it's that they may be virtuous. So yeah. But this is much too quick, just as an unwelcome epistemic company might involve agreement from someone you take to be morally inferior in some respect, so epistemic peer disagreement might involve someone you take to be morally superior in a relevant aspect. Absolutely. For example, you might disagree with an epistemic peer about the best policies for alleviating poverty, but acknowledge that your peer, unlike you, actually performs admirable work among the poor. This sort of case could very well pose an analog to vice in the case of disagreement. The analog to vice is the worry that you disagree with your epistemic peer due to some vicious trait that you have which your peer lacks, for example, insufficient love for those who are poor. Of course, this analogy requires that moral peerhood is not a proper part of epistemic peerhood. There is not and cannot possibly be, however, an analog for implication in the case of peer disagreement. If you are subject to implication, then by necessity you do not stand in a relation of epistemic peer disagreement. After all, the analog of implication would say that you endorse your view only because you, but not your interlocutor, are missing something important about the matter of disagreement. But if that is the case, then you and your interlocutor are epistemic peers. That's a little shaky, but that's okay. I mean, this is just how you define peerhood. I mean, you could do, if you separate out peerhood from logical, sort of like logical skill, then maybe you can do this. It's just like, well, because you might be equally smart but in completely different domains, and so you can't even do the reasoning, but in some sense you think they're just as smart as you, but like over there, and you're just as smart as them, but like over here, and like because there's no overlap, you have a lot of trouble with the implications over there. But that's not important, but it's fun. The role of epistemic peerhood itself provides a dissimilarity between the problems of disagreement and unwelcome epistemic company. Generally, an unstated assumption in the literature on disagreement is that disagreement with someone more expert than you poses an obvious problem for your belief, without the various puzzles attendant to the problem of peer disagreement. Suppose you are a layperson, we might say that encountering expert belief contrary to your own does nothing but intensify your epistemic problems. With unwelcome disagreement, the issue is trickier. With unwelcome agreement, the issue is trickier. Here I'll say something brief, though I think that this issue is worthy of further exploration in its own right. Unwanted expert agreement arguably does not generally intensify the epistemic problems of falsity or malfunction, provided that the expert beliefs are more likely than lay beliefs to be true and justified. Perhaps there are domains in which expert opinion is systematically epistemically corrupted, in which case the conditions wouldn't hold. But I do not think that this will be the majority of cases. That being said, unwanted expert agreement may often intensify the moral problems of vice and implication, provided that experts are more likely than lay people to have beliefs that are well integrated with their moral vices, or are more likely to be aware of the implications of their beliefs. I do not know how often these two contrasts between expert and lay opinion hold, but when they do, the relevance of expertise to the problem of unwelcome epistemic company will be asymmetrical in the way described. As sort of like these think tanks that come up with highly sophisticated theories to fit a certain worldview, and then people can be like, well, these experts said I agree with them, and so they must be right. Yeah, but of course, they're manufactured beliefs at that point. A manufactured agreement. So this happens. Actually, it happens a lot. What's it called? Like drug companies, they pay for, like, they go back to Big Tobacco. Big Tobacco paid for scientists to basically show that cigarettes are not bad for you, that they don't cause cancer. And so they had all this literature that showed that that cigarettes didn't cause cancer. It was crap. Of course they cause cancer. But they were able to get experts to systematically be epistemically corrupted. So this happens actually quite regularly, and it's constant. Companies are always, that's why they say you have to show where you get your funding from when you publish papers. And so quite often you'll sometimes see, well, look, maybe this thing that says that sugar is good for you and it's paid for by the sugar industry, maybe sugar isn't so good for you, or any other thing. Not to beat up on Big Sugar, but yeah. Okay. Finally, the problem of unwelcome epistemic company, although I think it is an important and neglected problem, nevertheless does not seem quite as worrisome as the problem of peer disagreement. For example, it seems that the ordinary Christian theist should be more worried about disagreement with atheist, Islamic, and other peers than about unwelcome agreement with religious extremists. Why might this be? Two related reasons suggest themselves. First, for any view that we think we correctly hold, there is some reason to think that it is prima facie likely that at least some people who are bad at reasoning or bad in some way will happen to hold this view. There are not good grounds for expecting that no one will endorse the right views for the wrong reasons. We expect to find unwelcome epistemic company, and so it is unsurprising when we do. In other words, we are not very surprised by certain kinds of epistemic luck, where people stumble upon the truth in epistemically or morally degenerate ways. On the other hand, for any view we correctly hold, it is prima facie likely that people who are as good as reasoning, it is prima facie likely that people who are as good at reasoning and epistemically well positioned as us will hold our view, and unlikely that they will not. Well, you would hope so, but I don't know about that. That is to say, we do not expect to the same degree to find peer disagreement, and so it is surprising when we do. We are at least somewhat surprised by certain kinds of competent failure. Yeah, I guess so. It's a question. It's like, people always say, it's like, is there bias in academia, or is it just that everyone comes to the same conclusion because everyone there is doing more work, and that's what the conclusion actually is? I don't know. Because then, is there more pervasive problems? And that's getting to, like, bigger sort of issues, and say, like, the science is like, is this all getting paid for by Big Tobacco that says cigarettes don't cause cancer? But I guess we are at least somewhat surprised by certain kinds of competent failure. Yeah, it's like, why are all those scientists saying things that they probably know are wrong? So there's a bigger sort of issue going on. You hope that people who you think are smart agree with you, but there's a lot of disagreement out there. I mean, if you know anything about philosophy, you just know that people hold wildly divergent views on things. You think that they wouldn't, but you find out that they do. And so it's surprising how divergent some of the opinions can be on things you thought were basically uncontroversial. Anyway, sure. Like I said, if anyone has any questions, please let me know, but getting to the end of this one. That's conclusion right there. Of course, we can still ask relevant questions. Why is competent failure more surprising than lucky success? I didn't have a full answer to this question, which deserves an inquiry in its own right, but I suspect that the answer has to do with the way in which we expect rationality to regulate our beliefs. Why is competent failure more surprising than lucky success? Well, things are hard. So it's like, why is it more surprising than lucky success? I don't know if it is. Actually, I'm not sure. Well, it depends what you mean by surprising. Like, it depends how you're looking at the problem. Why were all the scientists saying that cigarettes do not cause cancer? it's not so surprising. It was because they were getting paid to do that. It's just from the epistemic viewpoint, it might be surprising, but from the political and economic viewpoint, it made a lot of sense. So, I mean, this is just really the question. There's other things that go on in epistemology that don't have anything to do with epistemology. As the Vice pointed out very well earlier, is that if you're vicious, that has nothing to do with epistemology. And so the fact that they're vicious, and they might be competent otherwise, but if they're racist, then it's not more surprising. Just it turns out it was something else. And so this is sort of I think that kind of goes to it. An epistemic agent who is functioning well, or who is rational, or pick whatever epistemic dissertatum you would like, should to the extent track reality. Yes, that's the problem. No one knows what this reality thing is, and so you get a whole lot of other issues going on right here. What is this reality thing? I don't know. And who knows what properly functioning is for that matter either. Properly functioning perception of a tree, for example, should yield the belief that there is a tree. It would be extremely surprising if it did not. Another way to put the point, the failure of a properly functioning perceiver to acquire the appropriate perceptual beliefs demands explanation. No. I mean, yes, it does, but the failure of properly functioning requires the appropriate perceptual beliefs demands explanation, but the non-failure of a properly functioning perceiver to acquire the appropriate perceptual beliefs also demands explanation. We don't know how any of this works at all. And so, this is sort of, I think this paragraph is a little misdirected. I mean, I completely agree with the author here. It's just this paragraph, I think, is misdirected. Okay. On the other hand, malfunctioning cognitive faculties are not necessarily tracking anything at all, or in realistic cases, such faculties are only partially tracking reality. So while it is not wholly unsurprising when a malfunctioning perceiver acquires a correct perceptual belief, it is certainly not very surprising. Yeah. Except in sufficiently extreme cases and extreme circumstances, especially when a malfunctioning perceiver is more likely than not to get matters wrong, the lucky success of a malfunctioning perceiver does not demand explanation. Well, I disagree. Sometimes it does, because sometimes alternate ways of thinking about things, like a alternate epistemology, might be important. So it's like you think you have the right science, but then like some other science gets some like really good results, and you might, from your perspective, think that those people are using bad science. Maybe they know something about the world. It might be bad science, but that doesn't mean that all of their science is bad, and they might be tracking something that you guys aren't tracking. So this sort of the assumption of malfunction here is depending on the domain, it might not be so clear. This is what I mean. We don't know what reality is. We don't know what correct perceptual belief is. But again, this is really sort of nitpicking some different cases that might be going on. But overall, in the course of this essay, it follows. Conclusion. The problem of unwelcome epistemic company is, as far as I know, unexplored by philosophers, yet it is a problem of everyday life. This is unsurprising because accusations of guilt by epistemic association are asymmetrically popular. Well, what's unsurprising then? Is it unexplored? That should be surprising because they are asymmetrically popular. So I think... Oopsie. Should be surprising here. We tend to endorse them for people whose views we do not like and reject them in principle for views we do like. I think that the rejection is a mistake. There are relatively precise conditions in which different versions of the problem of epistemic company arise and where different attendant responses are justified. By paying better attention to these conditions, we can achieve better knowledge about not only other people and the truth generally, but about our own beliefs and moral character. Okay, this is a fun essay. I like that they actually did get what I consider, and I completely agree, is that this is a problem of everyday life. Like, there is definitely guilt by epistemic association. It's like, you are saying something that the racists say, and you're racist, therefore. It's like, well, not necessarily. It might be like that. The reason the racists are pushing it is because it goes into their narrative, but they're pushing it because they know it's also true. And that's the reason they're doing it, because it makes them sound smart that they're saying true things. And so that's why they're doing it. Now, it has ulterior motives because it plays into someone's narrative, but I mean, that doesn't make them wrong in that one case. The reason they're saying it is wrong, but that doesn't make the fact of the matter not the fact of the matter. Okay, so this is just a nice essay in general. I don't have a whole lot to say about it, and I've been going for quite a long time, so I think I'm going to cut the stream. Unless anyone has any questions, please let me know now. But yeah, have a good day, everyone, and stay safe out there. This I should probably try to say something about the essay, but no, I think everything was fine. I said basically everything I want to say. All right, thank you, and have a good day, and stay safe. Bye bye.